We have to have faith.
Yes, faith. It's an interesting concept. If you read the Bible, you can't miss it. Faith.
Between your faith and my Glock 9mm, I take my Glock. Come, let's go.
What better movie to celebrate New Year's Eve than Arnold Schwarzenegger's 1999 End of Days? Actually set on New Year's Eve in 1999, a movie about New Year's Eve being the end of the world. And what better year to publish this review? 2020, where it almost seems like it is the end of the year and New Year's Eve. So this one is directed by Peter Hyams and has got quite a good cast, actually. Obviously, Schwarzenegger heading it up. You've got Gabriel Byrne as Satan himself, but you've got a good few character actors kind of showing up for kind of smaller roles as well. Kevin Pollak, Udo Kier, Rod Steiger, to name but a few. And this movie came out, say, in 1999, a couple of years after the last Schwarzenegger movie that was Batman and Robin. Now, that was obviously quite an embarrassment for all involved. And Schwarzenegger actually had heart surgery in between these two films, which is also why there was a bit somewhat of a delay. And I actually remember seeing kind of like interviews and magazines sort of articles about this film, and I remember Schwarzenegger was quite proud of it because he thought this was kind of his like most dramatic role, so to speak, in quite a long time, because he kind of plays a character which is, at the end of his tether, is suicidal, things like this. And I remember reading, say interviews with him saying how kind of proud he was of this movie because it was the less of a heroic character in some respects. So what's the story? Now, I will say there is going to be some spoilers in this review, but it's a 20-year-old film, so, what are you going to do? So ultimately, we learn that there is a female child born kind of 20 years previous to this, who is fated to be the mother of Satan. And cut to 1999, and a few years before New Year's Eve, we learn that this girl, Christine, is destined to be the mother of the devil. And the devil has taken the form of Gabriel Byrne, however you say his name. And the church is kind of, in factions, to be honest. Some of them want to protect this girl. Some of them want to kill her to prevent the end of days. And in the middle of this, you've got Jericho, played by Schwarzenegger, who is a private security guy who's an ex-cop who ends up kind of protecting Christine ultimately from rogue church members and Satanists and the devil himself. What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. Anyway, I'm going to talk about what I didn't like first of all in this movie, and then we'll kind of go on to the positives. So there are a few things that kind of that bothered me a little bit, and especially when I was kind of rewatching this to review, because some of this stuff doesn't make a lot of sense. We have to be quite honest here. Yes, it's a fantasy film, but even so, in the context of the film, I was still questioning why certain things were happening. So I'm going to go through my kind of nitty picks first, really. So Schwarzenegger's character Jericho is a private security guy. He's hired to protect, at that point, they don't know he's the devil, Gabriel Byrne's character, who is kind of like a banker. But then he decides to do this kind of like this investigation. And I don't really know why he's doing it, because he isn't a police officer at this point. He is actually just a security guard at the end of the day, hired to protect Gabriel Byrne's character, who is, everyone involved here, a banker. So why he decides to kind of do a rogue investigation as to the identity of the shooter and stuff like that, it is a little bit baffling, to be honest, because he's kind of acting like a policeman when he isn't a policeman. It doesn't really make some sense in regards to a security work, if that makes sense. So that's kind of your first thing. There's a few kind of like, what I think are kind of like, just kind of things that are glossed over, little kind of moments here and there. I'm not going to go into it. Let me just give you one. There's a sequence where he is chasing the shooter, and after this kind of scene, this attempted assassination of the Gabriel Byrne character by this priest, and he's kind of lowered on a winch from a helicopter onto the ground, and then starts running after this kind of suspect. But he still has the winch attached to his back, and then it suddenly disappears. So there's a few kind of gaffes and kind of just logic issues throughout the movie. I just wanted to point out one because I don't want to get too nitpicky with it. One of the things, again, maybe a bit more of a logic issue here, and just a kind of like lazy storytelling to a certain degree. Now, I'm not religious. I'm actually an atheist, so I only have a basic understanding of kind of the rules of religion, so to speak. But I'm sure in Catholicism, it is quite a big sin to commit suicide, which is, spoiler alert, exactly what Jericho does to stop the devil. And I get in the movie he sacrificed himself to save the Christine character, but I thought you've kind of done a sin if we're talking about Catholicism here. And am I understanding the devil only has till midnight to actually do what he wants to do, shall we say, which is only a few seconds later. You could have just waited. I don't know. To me, the whole suicide thing didn't ring quite true, to be honest with you. So there's some nitpicky things here and there in the story that just seem like a little bit like that will be kind of, doesn't make sense, but just kind of like, that's fine. Any other criticisms I have of this movie? I think, to be honest with you, as much as I quite enjoy this movie, and I'm a big Arnold fan and I'm a horror fan, so combining these two things is kind of a bit of a rare treat, and this is actually one of my favourite Arnie movies. But I have to be honest, I think Arnold is a little bit miscast in this role. Because you can just imagine, apparently this was a Tom Cruise vehicle originally, but if you can imagine someone who had a little bit more dramatic chops, it would have been an entirely different film, with a bit more of a scary element. But because Schwarzenegger is here, it has that more of a cheesy action feel to it. Now, the movie that we got, I still enjoy, because I do like Schwarzenegger, and I do like horror films, and I like cheesy action films. But it doesn't kind of have that dramatic and maybe sort of, shall we call it, scarier edge. Had it been maybe an actor who had a bit more of the dramatic chops. I have to say as well, the scenes where, at the beginning when we're first introduced to Schwarzenegger's character, where he's trying to commit suicide, I'm thinking, it doesn't, I think he's struggling a little bit there, if I'm honest. And to be honest with you, when I first saw this movie, not knowing really anything about it, as soon as I saw him with the gun to it, I thought, okay, he's going to die and save him. When we learn his family was killed, so he's going to sacrifice himself at the end. I know it's going to happen, and that's what happened. So, there's a kind of like a little bit of an obvious way this kind of movie kind of goes, I have to say. In a kind of a more modern context, some of the effects haven't aged particularly well, and I always wondering about that. This movie has a lot of collateral damage, and I always can't help but wonder what the hell's happened to this kind of like this city after this, where there's been tons of police killed and stuff like this. That, again, it doesn't. I think in 1999 people didn't care about kind of that sort of stuff, but in this sort of day and age, you're thinking, Jesus, what would happen? What would be the kind of the aftermath of all this and stuff like that? But let's talk about what works. Like I said, this is somewhat of a unique movie for Schwarzenegger, and although he did Maggie, which was another attempt at a kind of more of a dramatic role, this is certainly his most, his kind of nearest into the kind of the horror movie genre, although it's more of an action film, if we're honest. But it is nice seeing him out of his element to a degree, but there's lots of kind of like cheesy gunplay as well. Now, if you are a person of faith, I do think this movie, despite the fact that I'm sure that Catholicism would say suicide is a big no-no, I like the fact that ultimately, in the story-wise at least, it's Schwarzenegger's faith in God that ultimately helps him defeat the demon, rather than kind of guns and stuff. So it's kind of like, there is a message there that, obviously, if you are a person of faith, is that ultimately the guns and the kind of like the grenades and stuff are a short fix. They might kind of slow the devil down, but ultimately it's faith which you should fall back on. And that's the kind of the message of the movie, really. And despite not being a religious person myself, I can appreciate there's still the message that it's kind of trying to say here. As I've said, there's lots of kind of great kind of character moments from character actors here that I quite enjoy. There's some quite fun moments. Miriam Margolyes, I think the actress's name is, where Schwarzenegger has a fight with a superpowered Miriam Margolyes, which is, I've got to say, quite fun. Gabriel Byrne is fantastic in this movie, I have to say. A charming devil who has a couple of moments where he does exude the menace and stuff like that. And this movie is quite big in scale. This was kind of a higher budget movie. It was kind of one of the films that I think were on the Schwarzenegger's decline in popularity, really. But, you know, nonetheless, it is still quite a high budget movie with lots of kind of spectacle, lots of extras, kind of lots of, you know, destruction, kind of like citywide stuff like that. I quite enjoyed it. I think the soundtrack is excellent. Some haunting kind of like musical notes that kind of like go around. It has got some imagery that I think is quite impressive. I think there's this kind of like this, for example, there's this weird looking guy on the kind of a subway car that sort of smashes into porcelain. It kind of like, that was always really freaky looking even before he turned into porcelain. I think the actor there was like kind of a little odd looking to begin with. And I quite like the design of the kind of the demon or devil at the end. I thought that was quite good. And again, the effects aren't brilliant by today's standards, but I can't really judge old effects, to be honest with you, by today's lens, because we have to think about what it was like in '99, and I think by then it was fine. Overall, it's realistically a little bit dumb, to be fair, but it's a fun movie and kind of fits in quite well with Schwarzenegger's filmography, because, you know, it's never been known for thoughtful films. Let's just call a spade a spade. But I actually do think this is a slightly underrated movie. I think other films get talked about a little more than this one. And despite some of its shortcomings, I do think this movie is engaging, and Schwarzenegger in a slightly different kind of role is an interesting sort of character, despite, I think, being a little bit obvious where his kind of character arc is going and things like that. I enjoy this movie a lot. Now, with my critical head, I have to say I would give this movie a 6 out of 10. I personally enjoy it a little more than that, if I'm sort of saying for entertainment value, but I have to kind of try and think a bit more critically, and therefore I'll give it a 6 out of 10, which is an above average score for me. But I do think it doesn't have quite the kind of the classic, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger that we kind of know and love, but it's still an enjoyable film, somewhat underrated, if I'm honest. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? And how, you know, is it the perfect New Year's Eve movie for 2020? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.